On Christmas night, my parents handed my sister the keys to a brand new $90,000 luxury SUV while the entire living room cheered. When it was my turn, they handed me a wrinkled envelope containing a single $2 lottery ticket. My aunt laughed and told me to audit my way to a jackpot since I was just a boring accountant. 3 days later, that exact quick pick ticket hit the $300 million grand prize. Suddenly, my phone lit up with 75 missed calls from the family, who had treated me like their personal bank for years. Before I tell you how I handled the ultimate betrayal, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been the scapegoat in a family that only loves you for what you can provide. The heat in the kitchen of my parents' sprawling Prince George's County estate was absolutely suffocating. I am Maya, 32 years old, and a senior tax auditor. While the rest of my family sat in the climate-controlled living room swirling expensive wine, I was standing over a 6-burner stove basting a prime rib that I had paid for entirely out of my own pocket. The air was thick with the smell of garlic and rosemary, but all I could focus on was the sound of my brother-in-law Connor echoing down the hallway. Connor was a 31-year-old white crypto bro who wore expensive loafers without socks and spoke entirely in corporate buzzwords. He was currently pitching his latest imaginary tech startup to my uncles and cousins, loudly claiming he was about to disrupt the digital finance space. He had never successfully launched a single company, but my family treated him like the next billionaire genius. My mother, Vivian, marched into the kitchen wearing a tailored emerald green dress that cost more than my first car. She stopped at the island and frowned, inspecting the plates I was preparing. She crossed her arms and glared at the cutting board. "Maya, what is this wilted parsley? You know the Mitchells are stopping by later for dessert, and we cannot serve cheap garnishes to our guests." I gripped the edge of the granite counter, taking a slow, deep breath to keep my temper in check. I looked my mother directly in the eyes. "I would not have had to cut corners on the herbs, Mom, if I had not quietly paid your $4,000 property tax bill last month, so this perfect estate would not end up on the county default list." Vivian simply waved her manicured hand, brushing off my financial rescue like it was a minor inconvenience that I should be honored to handle. Family loyalty was always her convenient excuse whenever she needed me to open my wallet. Before she could demand I run to the premium grocery store, Connor strolled into the kitchen to grab a drink from the stainless steel refrigerator. My younger sister Chloe trailed right behind him. Chloe was 29, wearing a designer silk jumpsuit and holding a glass of champagne. She was the undisputed golden child of the family, a self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer who posted aesthetic photos all day while producing absolutely zero income. Connor popped open a sparkling water and leaned against the counter, looking me up and down. "You are missing the networking out there, Maya. Being a wage-slave tax auditor is a dead end. You need passive income streams to really build a portfolio." Chloe laughed, a high-pitched tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Maya just needs to manifest abundance, Connor. She works way too hard and blocks her own blessings with all that negative energy." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Manifest abundance. That was incredibly rich coming from a woman whose maxed-out platinum credit card I had quietly paid off just 3 weeks ago so she would not get sued by the collection agency. I swallowed the bitter truth and carried the heavy roasting pan into the formal dining room. The mahogany dining table was set with fine china crystal glasses and heavy silver cutlery. My father, Roland, sat at the head of the table adjusting his silk tie. Roland was a man who loved the sound of his own voice and cared about our social standing above all else. He began the meal with a 10-minute prayer, thanking God for his own business acumen and preaching about the importance of building generational wealth. Generational wealth was his absolute favorite phrase, though the harsh reality was that his extravagant lifestyle was built on a fragile foundation of unpaid bills and my secret wire transfers. As we passed the mashed potatoes and the prime rib, the conversation quickly turned into a subtle roast of my life choices. Aunt Denise leaned over her plate, pointing her fork directly at me. "So Maya, when are you going to stop hiding behind a desk and find a husband? You are 32 years old. That clock is ticking loudly and you cannot cuddle with a spreadsheet." I placed my fork down carefully, wiping my mouth with a linen napkin. Someone has to be single and steadily employed Aunt Denise, otherwise who would fund the family emergencies when things go wrong. The table went completely dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Vivian quickly cleared her throat, shooting me a warning glare before shifting the spotlight back to her favorite subject. Chloe has gained 10,000 new followers this week on her social media pages. Her brand partnerships are just taking off beautifully. It is such an inspiring journey. It was entirely fabricated. I knew exactly how much money Chloe made because I filed her taxes for free every single year. She operated at a massive loss, but in my parents' house image was the only currency that mattered. I sat in silence for the rest of the meal, chewing food that suddenly tasted like ash. After dessert, we all moved to the living room, gathering around the towering 12-foot Christmas tree covered in gold and silver ornaments. It was time for the gift exchange. Roland stood up, tapping his crystal champagne flute to command the room's attention. He launched into an emotional speech about the entrepreneurial spirit, the value of taking risks, and the beautiful legacy of our family. He reached into the breast pocket of his blazer and pulled out a small black velvet box. He walked over and handed it directly to Chloe and Connor. Chloe gasped dramatically, putting her hands over her mouth as she ripped the box open. She let out a blood-curdling scream of pure joy, jumping up and down before sprinting to the front window and pulling back the heavy velvet drapes. I walked over to look out the window. Parked in the center of the circular driveway, gleaming brilliantly under the streetlights, was a brand new 2026 Range Rover with a massive red bow plastered across the hood. The entire living room erupted into cheers, applause, and joyful tears. Connor smugly twirled the electronic key fob around his finger as Chloe cried, pulling our parents into a tight embrace, thanking them for believing in their dreams. My mind immediately shifted into cold, hard auditor mode. I stood in the back of the room doing the mental math. A $90,000 luxury vehicle purchased for a sister who had not held a steady W-2 job since 2021. Given to her by parents whose property taxes I had literally just bailed out to prevent the county from seizing this very house. The sheer audacity of the financial abuse was so blatant, so unapologetic, that it made me physically nauseous. I felt the room spinning slightly as the reality of my role in this family solidified in my mind. I was not a daughter, I was an insurance policy. As the excitement over the luxury car finally began to die down, Vivian turned her attention to me. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a basic wrinkled paper envelope. She did not look proud, she looked inconvenienced. "We honestly did not know what to get you, Maya, since you are always so difficult and independent. You never really seem to need anything from us, so we thought this would be fun." She shoved the envelope into my hand. It felt incredibly light, paper thin. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out the contents. It was a single $2 Mega Millions quick pick lottery ticket. There was no greeting card. There was no thoughtful note. Just a cheap piece of paper printed at a local gas station. Aunt Denise burst into loud, cackling laughter from the sofa, slapping her knee. "A lotto ticket for the accountant. Maybe you can audit your way to a jackpot, Maya, since you love crunching those numbers so much." The entire living room erupted in laughter. My mother chuckled softly, covering her mouth. My father grinned, shaking his head. Chloe and Connor were too busy taking selfies with their new car keys to even look in my direction. I stood there, holding the cheap piece of paper, feeling a profound, chilling numbness wash over my entire body. Years of being the strong black woman, holding this family together, masking their embarrassing debts, protecting their fragile high society image, giving up my own peace of mind to ensure their survival. All of it reduced to a $2 joke for their entertainment. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give them the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown. I quietly turned around, walked to the entryway closet, and pulled out my heavy wool coat. Roland noticed me putting my arms through the sleeves, and his smile vanished instantly. "Where exactly are you going, Maya? We need you to clean up the kitchen and gather all this wrapping paper before you leave." I turned to face him, dropping the kitchen dish towel I had been holding onto the pristine hardwood floor. I looked at my father, then at my mother, and finally at Connor and Chloe. "You just spent $90,000 on a luxury SUV for a woman who has not contributed a single dime to society in 4 years. And you bought it for a man whose imaginary startup is currently facing a class action lawsuit for wage theft. You can clean up your own mess. The shock on their faces was instantaneous. Vivian's jaw actually dropped. Roland's face turned a deep shade of crimson. Connor stopped twirling his keys, looking suddenly panicked that I knew about his legal troubles. I reached for the brass handle and opened the front door, letting the freezing December wind rush into their perfectly heated fake little world. "The wage slave is officially clocking out," I said, my voice dead calm. "Do not call me when your bills are due next month." I walked out into the freezing night, ignoring my mother calling my name from the porch. I got into my sensible sedan, locked the doors, and tossed that $2 lottery ticket into the glove compartment without a second thought. I started the engine and drove away from the estate, vowing to myself that in the new year, I was cutting the cord for good. I had no idea that the worthless piece of paper sitting in my dashboard was about to give me the ultimate power to burn their entire facade to the ground. 3 days later, I was sitting at my desk at the accounting firm, nursing a low-grade headache and ignoring my phone. Vivian had been sending passive-aggressive text messages all morning, complaining about how my dramatic exit had ruined the holiday spirit. I swiped the notifications away, refusing to engage. My desk was covered in tax files and audit reports, the familiar chaos of my structured life. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee and clicked my mouse, bringing my computer screen out of sleep mode. A breaking news alert banner flashed across the top of my local news feed. The headline was bold and impossible to miss. $300 million Mega Millions winning tickets sold in Prince George's County. I skimmed the article with mild curiosity, which quickly shifted into a sharp, intense focus. The winning ticket had been purchased at the Oak Creek gas station. I froze, staring at the screen. The Oak Creek gas station was less than a mile from my parents' estate. It was the exact station my father Roland stopped at every single morning to buy his black coffee and a daily newspaper. He was a creature of absolute habit. My heart gave a strange, heavy thump against my ribs. I grabbed my car keys off the desk, practically running to the parking garage. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I unlocked my sensible sedan, throwing myself into the driver's seat and locking the doors. I popped open the glove compartment. The wrinkled paper envelope sat there exactly where I had tossed it on Christmas night. I pulled out the cheap gas station receipt and smoothed it flat against my steering wheel. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone to pull up the winning numbers. I read the numbers aloud in the silent car. 12, 34, 41, 56, 67, and the megaball 14. I looked down at the ticket. 12, 34, 41, 56, 67, 14. It was an exact match. Every single number aligned perfectly. I had won $300 million. The sheer magnitude of the number crashed over me, a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I did not scream or cheer. My auditor brain immediately kicked into high gear, calculating taxes, lump sum payouts, and asset protection strategies. The silence in the car was absolute, heavy with the terrifying realization of my newfound power. I was rich beyond my wildest comprehension, but I was also in incredible danger. My family, the people who viewed me as their personal emergency fund, would stop at nothing to get their hands on this money once they realized what Roland had given me. Before I could fully process the reality of my situation, my phone rang, shattering the quiet of the parking garage. The caller ID flashed my mother's name, Vivian. I took a slow, steadying breath and pressed answer, expecting a lecture about my behavior at dinner. Instead, Vivian bypassed any greeting and went straight for the demand. "Maya, I need you to wire $15,000 to my account by the end of the day." The audacity of the demand nearly made me laugh. "Why exactly do I need to wire you $15,000, Mom? Connor's business account is overdrawn again." Vivian said, her voice tight with stress but still carrying that familiar tone of entitlement. "And Chloe needs to pay the premium on her new car insurance. The insurance company requires 6 months up front for a luxury vehicle like that Range Rover. You know how these things work. Family helps family, Maya. We are a village. We have to support each other." A village. The word tasted vile in my mouth. A village, Mom. Really? Because 2 years ago when my appendix burst and I called you for help, You told me to take an Uber to the emergency room because you and Connor were at a wine tasting and did not want to lose your deposit. That was entirely different, Vivian snapped quickly, deflecting the blame. You are a single woman without responsibilities. Chloe has a family to maintain. Connor is building an empire. Strong black families lift each other up, Maya. Do not be selfish. I looked down at the $300 million ticket resting on my lap. The balance of power had shifted permanently, and she had absolutely no idea. I am not wiring you a single dime, I said, my voice ice cold. Tell the genius entrepreneur to get a job and tell your golden child she can sleep in her new luxury car when it gets repossessed. Do not call me for money again. I ended the call, hitting the block button on Vivian's number before she could dial back. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the garage. I was not going back to the office. I drove straight to downtown Washington, D.C., navigating the heavy midday traffic until I reached a sleek glass high-rise building. I walked into the polished lobby of a high-end law firm and bypassed the receptionist heading directly for a corner office at the end of the hall. I pushed the heavy oak door open without knocking. Tariq, my brilliant no-nonsense best friend from our days at Howard University, looked up from a stack of legal briefs. He was a ruthless estate lawyer who specialized in asset protection for high-net-worth individuals. Maya, what are you doing here? Tariq asked, raising an eyebrow at my sudden intrusion. You look like you just saw a ghost. I locked his office door behind me, pulled the blinds shut, and walked over to his massive mahogany desk. I slid the wrinkled lottery ticket across the polished wood, stopping right in front of him. Tariq leaned forward, picking up the ticket. He glanced at it, then pulled up the winning numbers on his computer monitor. His eyes widened slightly, darting between the screen and the piece of paper. He set the ticket down carefully as if it might explode and looked at me. He did not smile. He looked dead serious. When you have this kind of money, Maya family turns into a cartel, Tariq said, leaning back in his leather chair. We need to form a blind trust immediately. You cannot claim this publicly. If Roland realizes what he gave you, they will drag you through hell and back to get their cut. I know, I said, sinking into the chair opposite him. That is why I am here. Lock it down, Tariq. Lock all of it down so tight they cannot even smell the money. Tariq immediately started pulling up trust formation documents, his fingers flying across his keyboard. While he typed, my phone screen lit up on his desk. It was a local news push notification, breaking the silence in the room. Lottery officials confirm the winning ticket was purchased at exactly 4:32 p.m. on Christmas Eve at Oak Creek gas station. Tariq stopped typing. He looked at the notification, then looked at me. Roland is a creature of habit, right? He goes to that gas station every single day. Yes, I whispered, a cold dread creeping down my spine. And he knows exactly what time he buys his coffee and his quick picks. My phone vibrated violently against the glass desk. The caller ID flashed Roland's name. It stopped, then buzzed again. Vivian, then Chloe, then Connor. They know, Tariq said quietly, watching the screen light up repeatedly. The assault has officially begun. The sharp ringing of a silver spoon, tapping against crystal, cut through the low hum of dinner conversation. My father, Roland, stood at the head of the mahogany table, his chest puffed out beneath his custom-tailored blazer. The room immediately fell silent. Everyone turned their attention to him just as he preferred. He loved a captive audience, especially when he had the opportunity to perform his favorite role as the benevolent, wealthy patriarch. Family, he began, his baritone, voice echoing off the high ceilings. We talk a lot about legacy in this house. We talk about what it means to represent true excellence, to build empires from the ground up, and to pass that torch to the next generation of visionaries. I took a slow sip of my wine, hiding the bitter smirk forming on my lips. Visionaries. That was certainly one word for the two grifters sitting across from me. Roland turned his gaze toward my sister and her husband. His eyes softened with a sickening amount of pride. Chloe, you have always been a shining light. Watching you build your brand from scratch, watching you influence the culture and carve out your own space in the digital world has been nothing short of inspiring. My grip tightened on the stem of my wine glass. Chloe had not built a brand. She bought 10,000 bot followers online last year, using a credit card that I eventually had to pay off to save her from collections. Her influencing consisted of unboxing free skincare samples and posting photos of herself, drinking matcha lattes while complaining about how exhausting it was to be a creative. Roland then placed a heavy hand on Connor's shoulder. "And Connor, son, you came into this family and immediately embraced our drive. Your new tech venture is exactly the kind of disruptive, forward-thinking energy this family stands for. It takes a real man to take risks, to put it all on the line to build something massive." I stared at Connor. This mediocre white man was sitting at my father's table eating the prime rib I bought, actively bleeding my parents dry while being praised for his bravery. His disruptive tech venture was currently facing a wage theft lawsuit because he stopped paying his 3 remote contractors weeks ago. But in my parents' eyes, Connor was a misunderstood genius on the verge of becoming the next tech billionaire. "I am incredibly proud of the power couple you two have become," Roland announced, his voice swelling with theatrical emotion. "Building an empire is not easy. It requires the right tools, the right mindset, and the right presentation. Your mother and I wanted to make sure you have exactly what you need to drive your business forward in the new year." Roland reached into the breast pocket of his blazer and pulled out a small, sleek black velvet box. He extended his hand across the table, offering it to them. Connor reached for it, but Chloe snatched the box first. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled slightly as she popped the lid open. For a split second, the room was completely still. Then Chloe let out a deafening, ear-piercing shriek. It was not a normal sound of gratitude. It was a theatrical performance of pure, unadulterated hysteria. She slammed her hands over her mouth, knocking over her water glass in the process, and scrambled out of her dining chair. "Oh my God!" she screamed, sprinting past the table and rushing toward the heavy velvet drapes covering the front bay windows. "Oh my God, you did not. You did not." She ripped the curtains back. The entire family pushed back their chairs and crowded around the window, straining to see out into the freezing December night. I remained seated, slowly setting my wine glass down. I turned my head just enough to see what was parked in the center of the circular driveway. Sitting under the warm glow of the streetlights with snow lightly dusting its roof was a brand new 2026 Range Rover Autobiography. It was painted a pristine obsidian black with tinted windows and massive alloy wheels. Spread across the hood of the vehicle was a comically large red velvet bow, the kind you only see in ridiculous holiday television commercials. The dining room erupted into absolute pandemonium. Aunt Denise was hollering and clapping her hands. My cousins were whistling. Vivian stood next to Roland, wiping away fake tears of joy as she watched her golden child press her face against the window glass. Connor sauntered over to the window with a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. He reached into the small velvet box Chloe had discarded on the windowsill and pulled out the electronic key fob. He held it up, pressed a button, and the Range Rover's headlights flashed brilliantly in the dark. "This is unbelievable," Roland Connor said, turning to my father and shaking his hand with a firm, masculine grip. "This is exactly what I need for taking high-net-worth investors out to lunch. The startup is going to look incredibly legitimate pulling up in this. Thank you, sir, really." I sat perfectly still at the deserted dining table, staring at the flashing headlights through the glass. The noise of my family celebrating faded into a dull, distant hum as my auditor brain automatically shifted into clinical calculation mode. The base model for that specific Range Rover started at $90,000. Fully loaded with the trim package sitting in the driveway, it easily pushed $110,000. Add in the luxury vehicle taxes, the dealer fees, and the exorbitant premium insurance that Connor absolutely could not afford with his overdrawn bank accounts. My mind snapped back to a Tuesday morning exactly 4 weeks ago. Vivian had called me in tears, hyperventilating because a public tax lien was about to be placed on this very house. I had drained my emergency savings to quietly wire $4,000 directly to the county tax assessor's office. I skipped my own dental appointments. I wore a winter coat with a broken zipper. I exhausted my own emotional and financial bandwidth to shield them from the humiliation of losing their status. They had taken that breathing room, that tiny financial margin I had literally bled to give them, and used it to secure financing on a 6-figure luxury SUV for 2 able-bodied adults who contributed absolutely nothing to society. The sheer unmitigated audacity of the financial abuse settled deep into my bones. It did not manifest as a hot, screaming rage. It was a cold, absolute zero freeze. They did not just favor Chloe. They viewed me as nothing more than a mule, an invisible foundation designed to bear the crushing weight of their fake empire so they could stand on my back and hand the keys to a kingdom I paid for, to a golden child and her entitled husband. The celebration eventually moved back indoors. The freezing air had finally driven them away from admiring the shiny new financial mistake in the driveway. Chloe was busy posting videos to her social media accounts, while Connor loudly planned a road trip to the Hamptons. I remained at the dining table, my empty wine glass catching the light of the crystal chandelier. Vivian clapped her hands together, smoothing down her emerald dress. She turned her attention toward me, and the bright, joyous expression she had worn just seconds ago melted into a look of mild chore. She walked over to her designer handbag resting on the side console, unclasped it, and pulled out a basic white letter envelope. It was slightly wrinkled at the corners, like an afterthought she had shoved into her purse on the way out of a convenience store. She walked over and extended it toward me. Her posture was completely different from the reverence she had shown when handing over the keys to a $90,000 vehicle. "We honestly did not know what to get you, Maya," she sighed, exasperation dripping from every syllable. "You are just so difficult to shop for. You buy your own things and you are so terribly independent. We figured this would be a fun little stocking stuffer for you." I took the envelope from her hand. It felt virtually weightless. There was no cardstock thickness, no ribbon, no presentation. I slid my index finger under the cheap adhesive flap and pulled it open. Inside was a single $2 Mega Millions quick pick lottery ticket. I stared down at the pink and white thermal paper. It was printed earlier that afternoon, a literal $2 afterthought for the daughter who had kept a roof over their heads. Aunt Denise, who had just finished pouring herself another glass of expensive wine, leaned over to see what I was holding. She burst into a loud, booming cackle that rattled around the dining room. "A lotto ticket for the accountant!" Aunt Denise shouted, pointing her wineglass at me. "Well, look at that. Maybe our boring little number cruncher can finally audit her way to a jackpot. Lord knows she needs some excitement in her life." The entire room erupted into laughter. Chloe giggled without looking up from her phone. Connor let out a deep, booming chuckle, shaking his head. My father, Roland, smiled widely, highly amused by the complete humiliation of his eldest daughter. Even Vivian let out a soft, elegant laugh as if they were all in on some brilliant inside joke. They were laughing at me, the woman who subsidized their fake reality. They were standing in a house I saved from foreclosure, drinking wine. I paid for celebrating a car I would inevitably have to rescue from repossession, and they were laughing at me. The cold zero-point freeze in my chest solidified into absolute concrete. The illusion of family loyalty was dead, and they had just handed me the shovel to bury it. I did not cry. I did not yell. I simply picked up the linen dish towel I had used earlier to pull their dinner out of the oven. I stood up from the mahogany table slowly, deliberately. The scrape of my chair against the hardwood floor cut through the laughter. I grabbed my heavy wool coat from the back of the chair and slipped my arms into the sleeves. I tossed the dish towel directly onto the center of the pristine dining table, right over the expensive holiday centerpiece. Roland stopped laughing, his thick eyebrows pulled together in a deep frown. "What are you doing, Maya? We have not even served dessert yet. You need to clear these plates and pack the leftovers for your sister." I looked directly at my father, locking eyes with the man who had traded his pride for my paychecks. Then I shifted my gaze to my mother, and finally to the golden couple holding their new car keys. "The wage slave is officially clocking out," I said, my voice dangerously calm, cutting through the tension like a blade. "You all had a great laugh tonight. I hope you remember how funny this was when the county sends the next tax assessment." Vivian stepped forward, her fake smile entirely gone. "Maya, do not ruin Christmas with one of your moods. We gave you a gift." "You gave me exactly what I needed, Mom," I replied, grabbing my purse. "Clarity. You just dropped $90,000 on a man whose business is being investigated for fraud and a woman who refuses to work. Meanwhile, I am the boring accountant who bailed you out so you could keep playing rich for your country club friends." Connor puffed out his chest, stepping toward me. "Listen here, you need to show some respect." I shot him a look so lethal he actually stopped moving. "Do not speak to me, Connor. You do not have the net worth to look me in the eye, let alone give me orders. I turned back to my parents. Do not call me next month when the bills are due. Do not call me when his startup collapses. Do not call me when the dealership comes looking for that Range Rover. You are completely entirely on your own. I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. I heard Roland shouting my name, demanding I come back and apologize, but his voice sounded small and pathetic. I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the freezing December night. The biting cold air felt incredibly refreshing against my skin. I walked down the driveway past the ridiculous luxury vehicle with its giant red bow and climbed into my sensible sedan. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I looked down at the crumpled $2 lottery ticket still clutched in my hand. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh, tossed it carelessly into the open glove compartment, and slammed the latch shut. I started the engine and drove away from the estate, the dark road stretching out ahead of me. As I watched their house shrink in my rearview mirror, I made a silent, unbreakable vow. I was cutting the cord for good. I would never give them another dime, another moment of my time, or another piece of my peace. I was finally entirely free. 3 days had passed since the Christmas dinner disaster, and the silence from my end was apparently driving my mother insane. It was Tuesday morning, and I was sitting at my desk at the auditing firm, nursing a caffeine withdrawal headache and staring at a spreadsheet that was starting to blur at the edges. My phone vibrated against the desk, vibrating a persistent, irritating rhythm that I knew all too well. I glanced at the screen. 4 new messages from Vivian. You really embarrassed your father by walking out like that. Connor is furious. You need to apologize for what you said about his business. Chloe is stressed and it's affecting her content creation. Call me when you're done throwing your little tantrum. I muted the notifications, sliding the phone face down. The sheer delusion was almost impressive. They were still expecting me to fold to apologize for refusing to be their financial punching bag anymore. The cord was cut, but they hadn't realized they were in freefall yet. I turned my attention back to the dual monitors on my desk. The firm was quiet, most people still recovering from the holiday weekend. I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee and clicked a new tab to check the local news, a mindless distraction before diving back into the tax codes. A bold red breaking news banner flashed across the top of the screen. Breaking $300 million Mega Millions winning tickets sold in Prince George's County. I paused, coffee cup halfway to my mouth. 300 million. The number was staggering, the kind of money that altered family trees and reshaped entire realities. The article below the headline provided the details, confirming the staggering sum and the frenzy it was already causing locally. My eyes skimmed the text, landing on the second paragraph. Lottery officials have confirmed that the single winning ticket for the record-breaking jackpot was purchased on Christmas Eve at the Oak Creek gas station. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat, and the hum of the fluorescent lights above me seemed to amplify into a deafening roar. Oak Creek gas station. It wasn't just any gas station. It was the specific rundown Exxon station positioned exactly 1 mile from my parents' estate. It was the exact station where my father Roland stopped every single morning without fail to buy his black coffee and a newspaper. He was a man obsessed with his routines, convinced that his specific daily rituals were the secret to his supposed success. A cold electric shock shot down my spine. My mind raced back to Christmas night. Vivian handing me the wrinkled envelope, the cheap thermal paper, the careless, dismissive shrug as she told me it was a fun little stocking stuffer because I was too difficult to shop for. The ticket. The $2 quick pick ticket my father had undoubtedly purchased during his morning routine at Oak Creek on Christmas Eve. The ticket I had tossed into my glove compartment in a fit of absolute disgust. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic, erratic beat that drowned out the quiet office around me. I stared at the screen, the words Oak Creek gas station burning into my retinas. It was statistically impossible. The odds were astronomical. It was absurd to even entertain the thought. But the sheer terrifying coincidence of the location was impossible to ignore. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the industrial carpet. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't lock my computer screen. I snatched my car keys from the desk and bolted for the door, my sensible heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. I ignored the confused look from the receptionist as I practically ran past her. The elevator descent felt agonizingly slow, each floor clicking by like a countdown. When the doors finally slid open, I sprinted across the concrete expanse of the parking garage, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The air in the garage was damp and cold, but I was sweating. I reached my sedan, my hands trembling so violently, I fumbled the electronic key fob, dropping it onto the concrete. I swore under my breath, snatched it up, and jammed my finger against the unlock button. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and hitting the central lock button with a definitive clack. The silence of the car wrapped around me, suffocating and tense. I took a deep, shuddering breath, staring at the closed glove compartment. The plastic latch suddenly looked like the most intimidating object in the world. My life as I knew it was hovering on a precipice. The decision I had made to cut my family off was about to be tested in a way I could never have anticipated. If that ticket was a winner, the financial abuse I had endured would pale in comparison to the war that was about to begin. I reached out my fingers, wrapping around the cold plastic latch. With a sharp pull, the compartment popped open, spilling a mess of napkins, old registration papers, and service manuals. And there, resting innocuously on top of the pile, was the wrinkled white envelope. I pulled it out, the cheap paper feeling rough against my shaking fingertips. I didn't open it immediately. I sat there in the dim light of the parking garage, the weight of a potential $300 million secret resting in my palms. The wage slave was clocking out indeed, but I had no idea what kind of world I was about to clock into. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the crumpled white envelope resting in my lap. The paper felt completely unremarkable, but my hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold it steady. I took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent of cold leather and stale car air freshener, trying to ground myself. I reached for my phone resting on the center console. My thumb slipped twice before the facial recognition finally bypassed the lock screen. I opened my browser and typed the state lottery website into the search bar. The page loaded instantly. Right at the top, displaying the drawing results from last night, were 6 numbers encased in bright yellow circles. I tore the flap of the envelope. The cheap adhesive gave way with a dry rasp. I slid 2 fingers inside and pulled out the single pink and white thermal ticket. It was printed with the distinctive Oak Creek gas station logo at the very top. Right below, the timestamp marking. December 24th at 4:32 in the afternoon was a single row of quick pick numbers. I flattened the ticket against the steering wheel, pressing out the creases I had carelessly made when I threw it away in disgust. I forced myself to focus. I looked at the glowing screen of my phone. 12. I read the number aloud, my voice barely a whisper in the quiet car. I looked down at the ticket. The first number printed in stark black ink was 12. A cold prickle started at the base of my neck. I swallowed hard and looked back at the phone. 34. My eyes darted to the ticket. 34. My breathing stopped completely. I felt a sudden rush of blood to my ears. 41. I read the third number on the paper. 41. My chest felt tight, like a physical weight was pressing against my sternum. 56. I traced the number on the ticket with a trembling fingernail. 56. 67. The fifth number matched perfectly. 67. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, terrified that if I blinked, the numbers would scramble and rearrange themselves into a cruel joke. I had spent my entire adult life working with numbers, verifying audits, catching discrepancies. Numbers did not lie. I forced my eyes open and looked at the final golden circle on the website. The mega ball. 14. I slowly lowered my gaze to the final digit on the thermal paper. 14. An exact match. 12. 34. 41. 56. 67. 14. I had won $300 million. Anyone else might have screamed. Anyone else might have slammed their hands against the steering wheel, honked the horn, or dissolved into hysterical tears of joy. I did none of those things. I sat in absolute paralyzing silence. The air in the car felt thick and heavy, pressing against my skin. My mind instantly detached from the emotional magnitude of the moment and shifted into the cold, clinical reality of my profession. Instead of wild fantasies about buying private islands or flying first class to Paris, my auditor brain slammed into high gear with terrifying precision. 300 million was the annuity amount spread over 30 years. The cash option would be roughly 150 million. After a mandatory 24% federal tax withholding the top-tier income tax bracket adjustment and the steep state tax hit, I was looking at a net payout of around $90 million. $90 million of liquid untraceable cash dropping directly into my life. It was a level of wealth that fundamentally altered reality. It was generation-shifting power. It was enough money to buy back my freedom permanently. But with that staggering power came an immediate suffocating sense of danger. The cold realization washed over me like ice water plunging my heart into my stomach. I did not buy this ticket. Roland bought this ticket. My father, the man who leveraged my credit, who demanded my unyielding loyalty while disrespecting my very existence, was the one who swiped his debit card at that counter. He was a man obsessed with his own rituals and his own image. He would remember stopping at Oak Creek gas station on Christmas Eve. He would remember exactly what time he bought his coffee and his lottery tickets. More importantly, he would remember sliding this exact quick pick ticket into a cheap envelope and handing it to the daughter he considered his personal safety net. If my family found out about this ticket before I secured it, they would not just ask for a handout. They would launch a coordinated, ruthless assault. Vivian would demand it as back pay for raising me, throwing every toxic ounce of family guilt she could muster. Connor would try to legally claim it as a family syndicate asset to save his fraudulent tech company from total ruin. Chloe would genuinely believe the money was her divine manifestation, her reward for simply existing. They would drag me through court, smear my name in the press, and stop at nothing to rip this away from me. I was holding a nuclear bomb in my hands, and the timer was already ticking down. The target on my back had just become worth $90 million. I needed to move fast, and I needed to become utterly untouchable before the people who shared my last name realized what they had given away. The sharp ringing of my phone shattered the dead silence of my car. I jumped so hard my elbow slammed against the center console. The sudden noise was jarring, pulling me violently out of the cold, calculated reality of the $90 million net payout I had just been strategizing in my head. I looked down at the glowing screen resting on the passenger seat. The caller ID flashed a single name: Vivian. I let it ring 3 times. My thumb hovered over the red reject button. A tiny, foolish, deeply buried part of me actually thought that maybe, just maybe, she was calling to apologize. It had been 3 days since Christmas night. 3 days since I walked out of their house after being publicly humiliated with a $2 gag gift, while my sister cried tears of joy over a $90,000 luxury vehicle. I took a slow, steadying breath, gripping the winning lottery ticket in my left hand and pressed answer. I did not say a word. I just brought the phone to my ear and waited. Maya, I need you to wire $15,000 to my account by the end of the day. There was no greeting. There was no hesitation. There was absolutely no apology for the Christmas dinner disgrace. Just a direct, entitled command, delivered with the casual authority of a woman ordering a side salad at a restaurant. I stared straight ahead at the concrete wall of the parking garage. The sheer audacity of her voice actually made my chest tight. I looked down at the pink and white thermal paper in my left hand. $300 million. I was holding a piece of paper worth $300 million, and my mother was currently on the line treating me like a short-term payday loan facility. Why exactly do I need to wire you $15,000, Mom? I asked. My voice was dangerously flat, stripped of all the usual anxiety and deference I normally carried when dealing with her. Vivian let out a long, heavy sigh, sounding incredibly inconvenienced that I was forcing her to explain herself. Connor's business account is overdrawn again, she said, her tone clipped and stressed. The bank is threatening to bounce payroll checks for his contractors. On top of that, Chloe needs to pay the insurance premium on her new car. The insurance company requires 6 months upfront for a high-end luxury vehicle like that Range Rover, and they do not have the liquid cash right now. I closed my eyes. It took every ounce of my professional self-control not to laugh hysterically into the receiver. Connor, the supposed tech visionary, who had spent Christmas dinner calling me a wage slave, was bouncing checks. And Chloe, the golden child who was supposed to be manifesting abundance, could not even afford to legally drive the car. My parents had nearly bankrupted themselves to buy her. You know how these things work. Maya Vivian pressed on her voice, shifting into a practiced, manipulative cadence. Building an empire takes capital. There are growing pains. We have to protect the family image. Strong Black families lift each other up. We are a village. We support our own, and you do not have a husband or children draining your finances. You have the liquidity. It is your duty to step up when your sister needs you. A village. The word tasted vile in my mouth. It was the ultimate weaponization of the Black tax, that heavy unspoken expectation that the one successful stable child in the family must sacrifice their own financial future to subsidize the reckless choices of everyone else. A village mom. I repeated, the ice in my voice finally cracking to reveal the boiling rage underneath. Are we really going to talk about being a village? Maya, do not start with your attitude, Vivian snapped. I am not asking for a favor. I am telling you what the family needs. Because I remember what this village looked like 2 years ago. I interrupted, my volume rising. I remember waking up at 2 in the morning with agonizing abdominal pain. I remember calling you crying, begging you to drive me to the hospital because I could not stand up straight. Do you remember what you told me, Mom? There was a brief, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. That was different, Vivian muttered quickly. We were out of town. You were in Virginia, I shot back. You were 45 minutes away at a weekend wine tasting with Connor. You told me to take an Uber to the emergency room because you had already paid for the weekend package and you did not want to lose your deposit. I rode to the hospital in the back of a stranger's Honda Civic with a ruptured appendix. The Uber driver showed me more compassion in a 20-minute car ride than my own mother has shown me in 32 years. You left me to go into emergency surgery alone for fermented grape juice. You are a single woman, Maya. You can handle yourself. Vivian argued, her voice rising in defense. Chloe has a family to maintain. Connor is building an empire. You cannot hold on to the past when your sister needs you right now. I looked at the lottery ticket one more time. The balance of power in this family had shifted permanently, and she had absolutely no idea. She was still operating under the delusion that I was the desperate, dutiful daughter, hungry for her approval. I am not wiring you a single dime, I said, pronouncing each word with absolute crushing finality. Excuse me, Vivian gasped, genuinely shocked by the refusal. Tell the genius entrepreneur to go get a job making coffee? I continued, my voice steady and ruthless. And tell your golden child she can sleep in the back seat of her new luxury SUV when the bank inevitably repossesses it. Do not ever call my phone for money again. I pulled the phone away from my ear and hit the red end call button, cutting off whatever outraged shriek Vivian was about to unleash. I sat in the silent car, my chest heaving, a massive invisible weight lifting off my shoulders. I had finally said it. I had finally cut the cord. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and carefully slipped the winning ticket into the inner zip pocket of my designer handbag. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking space. I was not going back up to the office. I had exactly one person I could trust in this world, and I needed his legal expertise right this second. I pressed the accelerator, heading straight for downtown Washington, D.C. The drive down the Baltimore-Washington Parkway felt like a glitch in the Matrix. My hands gripped the steering wheel with such force that my knuckles ached, but my mind was completely detached, operating in pure survival mode. I navigated the heavy midday traffic into downtown Washington, D.C., pulling into the secure underground garage of a sleek glass high-rise. Tariq had been my best friend since our freshman year at Howard University. We had survived brutal macroeconomics exams and terrible cafeteria food together, and now he was a senior partner at a boutique estate planning firm. He was ruthless, brilliant, and exactly the kind of paranoid legal mind I needed in my corner right now. I bypassed his firm's elegant reception area, ignoring the polite protests of the front desk coordinator, and pushed open the heavy oak door to his corner office. Tariq was mid-sip of his iced coffee, reading through a dense legal brief on his dual monitors. He held up a single index finger, signaling me to wait a second. I did not wait. I walked straight to his massive mahogany desk, reached into the inner pocket of my handbag, and slid the wrinkled pink and white thermal paper across the polished wood. Tariq glanced down, annoyed by the interruption. His eyes scanned the cheap gas station paper, then shifted to my face. He looked back down at the ticket. I watched his hand slowly reach for his mouse. He pulled up a new browser tab, typing rapidly. His eyes darted from his monitor to the ticket and back again. Suddenly, he inhaled sharply, choking on his iced coffee. A violent sputtering cough sent drops of cold liquid splattering across his pristine leather desk blotter. He stood up so fast his heavy office chair knocked backward into the credenza. He looked at me, his jaw actually slack, his usual courtroom composure completely shattered. I did not say a word, I just nodded. Tariq walked straight past me to his office door, flipped the heavy deadbolt shut, and pulled down the privacy blinds on the glass walls. He turned back to me, and the best friend demeanor was entirely gone. In his place stood the shark I knew he was professionally. "Listen to me very carefully, Maya," he said, pacing the length of his office. "Winning this kind of money is not a blessing if you do not protect yourself. It is a curse. When you have this level of sudden wealth, family turns into a cartel." I sank into the leather guest chair, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, to leave behind a cold, sharp focus. I told him about the Christmas dinner. I told him about the $90,000 Range Rover my parents bought for my unemployed sister and her grifter husband. I told him about Vivian calling me just 30 minutes ago to demand $15,000 while telling me it was my duty as a single woman to subsidize their fake empire. Tariq stopped pacing. He leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. "Given what I know about Vivian and Roland, you are walking around with a target on your back that is worth 9 figures. We need to form a blind trust immediately. You absolutely cannot claim this publicly. In this jurisdiction, we have the right to claim lottery winnings anonymously through a legal entity, but we have to structure it flawlessly." I explained the mechanics with rapid-fire precision. We would establish a limited liability company, assign a designated trustee to act as the public face, and completely mask my identity from the public record. More importantly, we had to mask it from my family. Tariq warned me that if Roland realized the magnitude of what he handed me on Christmas night, they would not just ask for a handout. Connor would hire cheap lawyers to file lawsuits claiming the ticket was a family syndicate asset. They would drag me through brutal litigation, drain my energy, and smear my name in the press until I bled out in legal fees and surrendered a massive settlement just to make them go away. "I need you to lock it down, Tariq," I said, my voice steady. "Lock all of it down so tight that they cannot even smell the money." I did not waste another second. He moved back to his computer and immediately started drafting the preliminary retainer agreements and trust formation documents right there in the room. The silence between us was heavy, filled only by the rapid clacking of his keyboard. After 20 minutes, the large printer in the corner whirred to life, spitting out a thick stack of legal paperwork. Tariq handed me a heavy metal pen. I started signing my name, initialing page after page, binding myself to the smartest legal fortress money could buy. I was signing away my old life, trading my role as the family mule for complete financial invincibility. I was halfway through the final signature block when my phone, resting face up on Tariq's desk, vibrated violently. The screen illuminated with a breaking news push notification from a major local broadcaster. I stopped writing. Tariq stopped reviewing the pages. We both stared at the glowing screen. The text was stark and terrifying. Lottery officials confirmed the $300 million winning ticket was purchased at exactly 4:32 in the afternoon on Christmas Eve at Oak Creek gas station. My blood ran absolutely cold. The pen slipped from my fingers, clattering against the desk. Roland was a man governed by strict, unyielding routines. He took his lunch late, finished his errands in the late afternoon, and bought his coffee and lottery tickets on the way back to his estate. He knew exactly where he was on Christmas Eve at 4:32 in the afternoon. He knew exactly what he bought at that counter. And he knew exactly who he handed that specific quick pick envelope to under the Christmas tree. The glowing text of the news alert felt like a physical blow. 4:32 in the afternoon. Oak Creek gas station. I stared at the screen of my phone resting on Tariq's desk, the words burning into my mind. The absolute precision of that timestamp was a death sentence to my anonymity within my own family. Tariq picked up his own phone quickly, verifying the news alert on a local broadcast network. He looked across the desk at me, his expression grim. "Maya, tell me about your father. Tell me about his habits. How likely is it that he knows he bought that specific ticket at that exact minute? I let out a shaky breath, leaning back into the leather chair. Roland is a man who operates like a machine, I explained, my voice cold and hollow. He is obsessed with control. He balances his checkbook every morning. He keeps every single receipt for tax write-offs. He knows exactly how much gas is in his car and exactly how many steps he takes a day. He is not a man who buys a random lottery ticket and forgets about it. He buys them strategically. I closed my eyes, picturing Christmas Eve. The timeline snapped into focus with terrifying clarity. We were at the estate preparing for the holiday dinner. Roland realized we were low on premium ice for his scotch, and he wanted to pick up a specific brand of cigars for the uncles. He left the house right around 4 in the afternoon. The Oak Creek gas station is the only place in our zip code that sells those specific cigars. He would have walked in, gone straight to the counter, bought the cigars, grabbed his ice, and purchased his quick pick lottery tickets. The transaction would have been processed right at 4:32. Tariq leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. And he paid with a card. Always, I replied, opening my eyes to meet his gaze. He never carries cash because cash cannot earn reward points. If he checks his banking app right now, the transaction timestamp will perfectly align with the news report. He will know he purchased the winning ticket, and he knows exactly who he handed that ticket to on Christmas night. The heavy silence in the office returned, but it was no longer the silence of strategic planning. It was the suffocating quiet before a bomb detonates. I watched Tariq process the information. His legal mind was already calculating the defensive maneuvers we would need to deploy to shield my assets from a man who viewed his children as proprietary investments. Then the silence shattered. My phone vibrated violently against the thick glass overlay of Tariq's desk. The sudden harsh buzzing sound made my heart slam against my ribs. I looked down at the bright screen. Roland. The name flashed in bold white letters across the dark background. He was calling. It was barely noon on a Tuesday. Roland never called me during business hours. He considered it a sign of weakness to interrupt the workday for personal matters, unless it involved demanding a financial favor. He was not calling to check on my well-being. He was not calling to apologize for his brutal behavior at Christmas dinner. I was calling because the local news had just broadcasted the exact location and time of the $300 million ticket sale, and he had done the math. "Do not touch it," Tariq commanded, his voice low and authoritative. "Do not answer. Do not decline. Let it ring." I sat perfectly still, my hands gripping the armrests of the guest chair. The phone continued to buzz, inching slowly across the glass desk with each vibration. The psychological weight of that incoming call pressed heavily against the walls of the room. I pictured Roland standing in his pristine home office, his face red with sudden realization, gripping his own phone as he listened to the line ring. He knew I had the ticket. He knew I walked out of his house with it. I knew the power dynamic of our entire relationship had just flipped, and he was desperate to regain control before I realized what I held. The ringing finally stopped. The screen went dark. A missed call notification popped up. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. "He knows," I whispered. Before Tariq could respond, the phone lit up again. Another violent vibration. This time the caller ID flashed a different name. Vivian. My mother was calling less than 10 seconds after my father. The coordination was immediate. Vivian, who just an hour ago had ruthlessly demanded I wire her $15,000 to bail out her unemployed son-in-law, was now frantically trying to reach me. She had clearly just been briefed by Roland. I could almost hear the panic in her voice without even picking up the phone. She would use her sweetest, most manipulative tone. She would call me her brilliant, lucky girl. She would pretend the Christmas dinner humiliation never happened and demand we celebrate our family victory together. Let it go to voicemail. Tariq said, his eyes locked on the flashing screen. We need to see what narrative they try to spin first. The phone stopped ringing. Another missed call notification joined the first. Then the screen illuminated once more. Chloe, my younger sister, the golden child who had laughed in my face while twirling the keys to a $90,000 luxury vehicle I indirectly funded, was now calling me back to back. Chloe never called me unless she needed me to fix a crisis or pay a bill. Now she was calling because she smelled money. She probably thought the $300 million was her ultimate manifestation, finally arriving just delivered to the wrong sibling. The phone buzzed relentlessly. After Chloe, the screen flashed again. Connor. My white brother-in-law was calling. The man who had mocked my career and actively drained my parents' equity to fund his fraudulent crypto startups was now trying to reach me. I stared at the device as it continued its frantic dance across the desk. The assault had officially begun. The phone did not stop. Missed call from Roland. Missed call from Vivian. Text message from Chloe. Missed call from Connor. Text message from Aunt Denise. The notifications began to pile up with terrifying speed. They were mobilizing. The family text threads were likely exploding. They were hunting me down digitally, desperate to secure the ticket before I could secure myself. Every vibration was a reminder of their sheer entitlement. They did not view this as my lottery win. They viewed it as their rightful inheritance temporarily held in my custody. I watched the screen light up again and again. The panic that had initially gripped me slowly burned away, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. For 32 years, I had answered every single ring. I had picked up the phone when they needed bailouts, when they needed property taxes paid, when they needed me to play the role of the reliable, invisible safety net. I reached out and placed my hand firmly over the vibrating phone, silencing the physical noise but letting the screen flash wildly under my palm. "I am not answering," I said, my voice completely steady. Tariq smiled a sharp, predatory grin. "Good. Let them panic. We have trust to file." The screen continued to flash endlessly beneath my hand. 10 missed calls, 20 missed calls. The digital onslaught poured in relentless and desperate, but for the first time in my life, I was completely, entirely untouchable. The vibration under my palm was relentless. It felt like holding a live wire. I sat in the guest chair of Tariq's corner office, staring down at the glowing rectangle of glass as it lit up, buzzed, went dark for a fraction of a second, and immediately lit up again. The notification counter on my lock screen was climbing with terrifying speed. It was a digital avalanche playing out in real time, a visual representation of my family losing their absolute minds. Tariq did not look up from his dual monitors. His fingers were flying across his mechanical keyboard, drafting the irrevocable trust documents that would legally sever my identity from the $300 million jackpot. The heavy printer in the corner of his office hummed to life, spitting out pages of complex legalese designed to build a fortress around my newfound wealth. We were operating in complete silence inside the room, but my phone was screaming. I lifted my hand, allowing the screen to fully display the chaos. The numbers were staggering. 20 missed calls from Roland. My father never called anyone twice. He believed that if he called you once, you should drop whatever you were doing and call him back immediately with an apology for making him wait. 20 missed calls meant he was pacing the hardwood floors of his Prince George County estate, red in the face, barking orders at Vivian, and completely short-circuiting over the fact that he could not 30 missed calls from Vivian. 30. Just an hour ago, this same woman had called me a selfish single woman while demanding I wire her $15,000 to cover her golden child's luxury car insurance. Now she was frantically dialing my number every 60 seconds. I could perfectly picture her clutching her designer phone, her manicured nails tapping furiously against the screen, panicking because the financial safety net she had abused for years was suddenly refusing to deploy. 15 missed calls from Chloe. My sister, the supposed lifestyle influencer who had spent Christmas dinner laughing, while I was handed a $2 gag gift, was suddenly very interested in speaking to the boring tax auditor. Chloe only called me when she needed a bailout. 15 calls meant she had already mentally spent the money. She was probably already browsing real estate listings in Calabasas and adding designer handbags to her online shopping carts, entirely convinced that my windfall was her divine manifestation coming to fruition. 10 missed calls from Connor, my white brother-in-law, the mediocre crypto bro who was currently facing a wage theft lawsuit. Connor had spent the holidays mocking my career, calling me a wage slave, and strutting around my parents' driveway, twirling the keys to a $90,000 Range Rover I indirectly paid for. Now he was blowing up my phone, trying to establish dominance, trying to position himself as the financial manager of a fortune that did not belong to him. 75 missed calls in the span of 30 minutes. It was a masterclass in toxic family dynamics playing out entirely through digital notifications. But the missed calls were only the beginning. The text messages began to flood the screen, stacking on top of each other in rapid succession. I did not need to unlock the phone to read the previews. They were broadcasting their desperation right there on the lock screen. The family group chat, which I had muted months ago, was exploding. Aunt Denise, who had practically choked on her wine laughing at my lottery ticket on Christmas night, was suddenly texting in all capital letters. "Maya, you better pick up this phone right now. We are your blood. Do not forget who raised you and kept a roof over your head. Call your father." I let out a sharp breath of disbelief. Aunt Denise had not raised me. Aunt Denise had borrowed $3,000 from me in 2019 for a cosmetic procedure and blocked my number when I asked for repayment. Yet here she was demanding loyalty, capital letters and all, because she smelled blood in the water. I watched the tone of the incoming messages shift in real time. It was a fascinating psychological study. The first wave of texts had been frantic but relatively standard. Vivian texting Maya, "Sweetheart, please call mommy back." Roland sending a commanding, "Pick up your phone, Maya. We have an urgent family matter to discuss." Chloe sending a string of crying emojis and prayer hands. But as the minutes ticked by, and I continued to enforce my absolute silence, the panic morphed into something dark, aggressive, and incredibly revealing. They realized I was not at my desk. They realized I was not answering. And they realized I knew exactly what I was holding. The fake sweetness vanished completely. The mask slipped. Vivian sent a new message. "Maya, this is not a game. Stop acting like a child and answer the phone. You are causing your father severe chest pains. Do not be selfish today of all days." I scoffed quietly. Weaponizing his health. That was a classic Vivian maneuver. Then came a text from Connor. It was lengthy, formatted like a business email, completely devoid of any familial warmth. "Maya, we need to get ahead of the tax implications on this. Do not speak to any financial advisors until we sit down. I have a team ready to structure the holding company. Call me immediately so we can lock this down." I was already trying to intercept the funds. He wanted to funnel my money into his failing startup shell companies. But it was the next sequence of messages that made the air in my lungs go completely still. It was a text from Roland, followed immediately by a text from Chloe. Roland wrote, "Maya, bring the ticket to the house immediately. We need to put it in the family safe. We need to talk about our ticket before the press finds out." Chloe followed up seconds later. "Maya, Connor is right. We need to hire security. Tell us where you are so we can come get our ticket." Our ticket. I stared at the word. Our. My jaw set so hard my teeth ached. The muscles in my neck pulled tight enough to snap. Our ticket. When I was working 16-hour shifts during tax season to cover my own rent, they did not call it our paycheck. When I was quietly wiring thousands of dollars to the county assessor's office, so Roland and Vivian would not lose their sprawling estate, they did not call it our debt. When Chloe maxed out her credit cards buying designer clothes to maintain her fake influencer lifestyle, they did not call it our financial burden. I carried the weight entirely alone. I was expected to shoulder the crushing pressure of the black tax, the unspoken mandatory sacrifice demanded of the successful child to subsidize the failures of the rest of the family. But the absolute second, a piece of paper worth $300 million was involved. It magically transformed into our ticket. They did not view me as a human being. They did not view me as a daughter or a sister. They viewed me as a holding account. They genuinely believed that because Roland handed me that wrinkled envelope as a public humiliation tactic, they were legally and morally entitled to the payout. They thought I was going to walk back into that toxic house hand over the golden goose and let Connor manage my wealth while Vivian decided what meager allowance I was permitted to keep. Tariq stopped typing. He swiveled his heavy leather chair around to face me. He took one look at my face and knew exactly what had just happened. "What did they say?" Tariq asked, his voice low and dangerous. I picked up the phone, gripping the sleek metal edges. I looked at the lawyer who was about to help me burn my family tree to the ash it deserved to be. "They stopped asking me to call them back," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "They are demanding that I come home so we can discuss our ticket. They think this is a family asset, Tariq. Connor is already trying to position himself as the portfolio manager." Tariq let out a dark, humorless laugh. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his tailored vest. The audacity is actually clinical, he said. They gave you a $2 gag gift to embarrass you in front of the extended family, and now they want to invoke the village mentality to claim a 9-figure payout. I unlocked the phone, the screen illuminating my face in the dim office. I tapped the phone icon and navigated to the voicemail inbox. The little red notification badge showed 12 unheard messages. We need to hear them, I said, tapping the screen. I need to hear exactly what narrative they are spinning before they realize I have already hired the best estate lawyer in the district. Tariq nodded, gesturing to the center of his desk. Put it on speaker. Let us hear what the cartel sounds like when they are desperate. I placed the phone squarely in the center of Tariq's heavy glass desk, the screen glowing against the dark wood framing. The little red notification badge for my voicemail inbox had climbed to 15 while we were talking. I tapped the icon, selected the first message in the queue, and hit the speaker button. The office was dead silent save for the faint hum of the city traffic 14 floors below. A sharp, staticky intake of breath filled the room, followed immediately by my mother's voice. It was pitched an octave higher than usual, dripping with a sugary manufactured warmth that instantly made my skin crawl. Maya, sweetheart. Vivian cooed, the fake affection so thick it sounded rehearsed. It's Mommy. Listen, darling, Daddy and I were just talking about that little stocking stuffer we gave you for Christmas. The quick pick. We just saw the news and oh my goodness, we are just so thrilled, our brilliant lucky girl. Daddy knew that gas station was good luck. Anyway, we are popping champagne right now, so bring yourself home immediately so we can celebrate as a family. Love you. The message beeped, signaling the end. I stared at the phone. Mommy. She hadn't called herself that since I was in middle school. And brilliant lucky girl. Just a few hours ago, I was a selfish single-wage slave who needed to be reminded of her duty to the family. Now I was their golden goose, and she was trying to wrap her claws around my neck disguised as a maternal embrace. Tariq let out a soft, amused scoff, picking up a pen and tapping it against his notepad. The pivot is incredible, he murmured. She completely bypassed the fact that she kicked you out on Christmas and went straight to our lucky girl. Classic narcissistic reframing. Play the next one, I said, my voice flat. I tapped the screen. The next message was from Roland. Maya, pick up the phone. His voice was low, commanding, lacking any of Vivian's fake sweetness. It was the voice he used when he expected immediate compliance. This is not a game. I purchased that ticket with my debit card on December 24th at 4:32 p.m. I have the bank statement to prove it. You are currently in possession of a family asset. We need to secure the physical ticket in my home safe immediately to prevent any liability. Do not speak to anyone. Do not sign anything. Come straight to the house. We are waiting. The voicemail ended. I looked at Tariq. He was already shaking his head, a cynical smirk playing on his lips. He's trying to establish chain of custody by emphasizing that he paid for it. He's laying the groundwork to claim he never formally gifted it to you or that it was meant to be shared. He's treating you like a courier who just happened to be holding the bag. He literally handed it to me in front of 12 people and laughed when Aunt Denise said I should audit my way to a jackpot. I reminded him, the memory burning hot in my chest. Which is exactly why his argument is legally garbage, Tariq replied, leaning back in his chair. A gift is a gift. The transfer of possession in front of witnesses solidifies your ownership. He can rattle his bank statements all day. It doesn't change the fact that he handed you the winning ticket of his own free will. But he's desperate, and desperate men say stupid things. Let's hear what Connor has to say, I muttered, tapping the next message. The audio crackled and Connor's voice filled the room. It was fast, aggressive, and laced with an arrogant entitlement that made my blood boil. Hey Maya, it's Connor. Listen, I need you to call me back right now. We have a serious situation here. Since Roland purchased the ticket with his funds legally, we are looking at a family syndicate asset. You cannot claim this individually without triggering massive tax liabilities and potential legal disputes from the estate. I have my legal team standing by to structure a holding company so we can distribute the funds equitably. If you try to run with this, I will have my lawyers file an injunction to freeze the payout. Don't be stupid, Maya. Call me before things get ugly. The message clicked off. The silence in the office felt different this time. It wasn't just heavy, it was charged. Tariq burst out laughing. It was a loud, genuinely delighted sound that echoed off the mahogany walls. He tossed his pen onto the desk and clapped his hands together. "Oh, this is beautiful," Tariq chuckled, shaking his head. "A family syndicate asset." He actually used those words. He sounds like he just watched an episode of Suits and decided to play lawyer. "Is there any truth to it?" I asked, needing absolute certainty. "Can he file an injunction?" "Anyone can file anything if they find a lawyer hungry enough," Tariq said, his amusement fading into sharp professionalism. "But it would be laughed out of court. A syndicate requires a formal pre-existing agreement, usually documented, demonstrating a shared intent to purchase and split lottery winnings. Roland bought a single quick-pick ticket on a whim and handed it to you as a gag gift. There is no syndicate. Connor is trying to use legal buzzwords to intimidate you into handing over control of the asset. He said he has a legal team," I pointed out, though I already knew Connor was broke. "Connor doesn't have a legal team," Tariq countered smoothly. "Connor has a severely overdrawn business account and a pending wage theft lawsuit. He's probably scrambling to find a strip mall attorney who will take the case on contingency, promising them a cut of a $300 million pie." Tariq leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk, his eyes locking onto mine. "But Maya, listen to me. His legal threat is garbage, but it proves exactly what we are dealing with. They will stop at nothing to extort you. They will lie, they will manipulate, and they will try to use the legal system to drain you emotionally and financially until you surrender." I stared at the dark screen of my phone. The 75 missed calls, the frantic texts, the unhinged voicemails. It was a coordinated attack. They weren't seeing a daughter or a sister who had just experienced a life-changing miracle. They were seeing a hostile takeover target. They were seeing a sudden infusion of capital to save their sinking fraudulent ships. "They don't know who they are dealing with anymore," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I spent my entire adult life auditing financial records, tracing hidden assets, and exposing fraud. They think I'm going to crumble because Connor threatens me with an injunction. They think I'm going to run back to Roland because he demands I put the ticket in his safe." I picked up the phone, no longer afraid of the flashing notifications. "Let them file their injunctions. Let them hire their cheap lawyers. I want them to burn whatever remaining capital they have trying to fight me." Tariq smiled, the predatory gleam returning to his eyes. "That's the spirit. We file the trust documents in exactly 1 hour. By the time they even figure out how to draft a cease and desist, the money will be legally untouchable, and your identity will be a ghost in the system." My phone buzzed again in my hand. A text message from Chloe. "Maya, where are you? Dad is getting really angry. Connor says if you don't come home by 2 p.m., he's calling the lottery commission to report the ticket stolen." I let out a sharp, incredulous breath. Stolen. They are going to claim I stole the ticket they literally handed to me. "It's a desperate escalation," Tariq noted. "But it means they are panicking. They are losing control of the narrative, and they know it." "Let them panic," I said, sliding the phone into my bag. "Finish the paperwork, Tariq. We have a blind trust to establish, and I have a family to bankrupt." The ink on the irrevocable trust documents was barely dry when I finally left Tariq's office. The sun had long set over Washington, D.C., replacing the frantic energy of the workday with the cold, illuminated stillness of the evening. For the first time in my life, I walked out of a building knowing I was completely financially invincible. The $90 million net payout was legally secured, shielded behind layers of corporate entities and a designated trustee. I was a ghost. But as I pulled my sedan into the secure parking garage of my apartment building, the flashing notifications on my phone served as a grim reminder that my family had not given up the hunt. I grabbed my handbag and walked toward the glass doors of the lobby. My building was a high-security, high-rise, designed specifically to keep unwanted elements out. Marcus, the evening concierge, was usually a beacon of calm professionalism. Tonight, however, the lobby was a scene of absolute chaos. Even through the thick glass, I could hear the shrill, frantic pitch of my sister's voice echoing off the marble walls. I swiped my key fob and pushed the door open. Chloe and Connor were standing directly in front of the concierge desk, aggressively leaning over the granite counter. Chloe was wearing her signature oversized designer sunglasses indoors while jabbing her manicured finger toward Marcus. Connor stood right beside her, his face red with frustration, demanding that Marcus grant them immediate access to my floor. Marcus caught my eye over Connor's shoulder. His expression was a mix of profound relief and quiet apology. I gave him a subtle nod indicating I would handle it. Chloe spun around, sensing the shift in Marcus's attention. She ripped the sunglasses off her face and let out a high-pitched shriek the moment she saw me. She did not look like the polished lifestyle influencer she pretended to be online. She looked frantic, unhinged, and completely consumed by greed. "Maya, where have you been?" she screamed, her voice echoing through the expansive lobby. "We have been waiting here for 2 hours. Dad is having a literal heart attack at the house and you are avoiding our calls. Give me the ticket right now. We are going straight to the bank tomorrow morning to put it in the family safety deposit box." She closed the distance between us in 3 rapid steps, reaching out as if she intended to physically snatch my handbag right off my shoulder. I stepped back sharply, raising my left hand in a clear, unmistakable gesture to stop. "Do not touch me, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "And do not ever come into my building and harass the staff again." Chloe scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Stop being so dramatic, Maya. This is a family emergency. We need the ticket so we can figure out the distribution. Dad already talked to his accountant. We are splitting it 4 ways to avoid the gift tax penalties. You get a share. I get a share. Mom and Dad get a share. And Connor is going to manage the investment portfolio for us." The sheer delusion of her statement hung in the air. Splitting it 4 ways. Connor managing the portfolio. They had already divided and spent my money in their heads while standing in the lobby of a building they had to beg to get into. Connor stepped forward, noticing that Chloe's aggressive approach was failing. He tried to adopt the smooth, confident persona he used when pitching his fraudulent startups. He adjusted his expensive blazer and shot me what he probably thought was a charming smile. "Maya, let us just take a breath," he said, lowering his voice to a patronizing murmur. "We are all on the same team here. Roland bought the ticket. You are holding it. It is a win for the whole family. But we have to be smart about the capital allocation. I have a major tech buyout on the table right now. I need $2 million in liquid capital by Friday to leverage the acquisition. If we pool this money immediately, I can triple our net worth in 6 months. I just need you to hand over the ticket so we can secure the bridge loan against it tomorrow morning." I stared at him. He was not asking for a favor. He was pitching me a hostage negotiation dressed up as a business opportunity. He needed $2 million by Friday. That meant his wage theft lawsuit was likely moving to a judgment, or his creditors were finally closing in. He was drowning, and he was demanding I throw him a $2 million life preserver from a ship he had tried to sink just 3 days ago. I turned away from him entirely, walking straight toward the bank of elevators. "I am going upstairs to my apartment," I said, projecting my voice so Marcus could hear me clearly. "If either of you try to follow me, Marcus will call the police and have you removed for trespassing." I hit the call button for the elevator. The digital bell chimed immediately, and the stainless steel doors slid open. I stepped inside, turning to face the lobby. Connor lunged forward. He moved with alarming speed, wedging his large frame right between the closing elevator doors. The safety sensors beeped in protest, forcing the doors to retract violently. Connor stood directly in the threshold, his hands gripping the metal doorframe, physically trapping me inside the small space. The fake charm completely vanished from his face. His skin was flushed, his jaw locked in a hard, rigid line. The desperation he had been trying to hide was now fully exposed. "You are not keeping our money, Maya," he snarled, his voice dropping the professional facade entirely. "I am not playing games with you. My buyout closes on Friday. If I do not have that $2 million in escrow by the end of the week, I lose the entire company. You are going to give us the ticket, or I am going to have my lawyers freeze every single asset you touch. You will not see a dime for years." The physical intimidation was a new tactic. Connor was much larger than me, and standing in the confined space of the elevator threshold, he clearly expected me to cower. He expected the dutiful, quiet sister-in-law to fold under the pressure of a white man demanding her compliance. He severely miscalculated. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. With one swift motion, I opened the camera application, switched it to video mode, and hit the red record button. I raised the phone, pointing the lens directly at Connor's face. "I am recording you, Connor!" I said, my voice ringing out with absolute titanium authority. "You are currently trespassing in a secure residential building. You are physically restricting my movement, and you are attempting to extort me for $2 million. You have exactly 3 seconds to remove yourself from this elevator before I send this video to the Metropolitan Police Department and press formal charges for harassment and false imprisonment." Connor's eyes darted from the camera lens to my face. He looked for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of the subservient woman he had mocked at Christmas dinner. He found absolutely nothing. I counted my voice echoing in the small metallic space. Chloe rushed up behind him, pulling frantically at his blazer. "Connor, stop it!" she hissed, her influencer image preservation instincts finally kicking in at the sight of a recording camera. "She is going to post it. Let us just go. We will call the lawyers tomorrow." I continued, never lowering the phone. Connor's grip on the elevator doorframe tightened until his knuckles turned stark white. He stared down at me, his chest heaving with barely suppressed rage. The mask of the brilliant tech entrepreneur was gone, replaced by the venomous glare of a desperate failing man who had just been checkmated. He slowly stepped backward, pulling his body out of the threshold. "You are making a massive mistake, Maya," he spat, the words dripping with pure hatred. "You are going to regret this." I did not say a word. I kept the camera rolling and my eyes locked on his as the stainless steel doors finally slid shut, sealing me inside. The heavy mechanical clunk of the elevator engaging sounded like a vault locking into place. I stood alone in the quiet ascending car, watching the floor numbers tick upward. The ambush had failed. The physical intimidation had failed. My family had officially declared war, but they had no idea they were bringing threats to a battle I had already won. I stepped off the elevator and walked directly into my apartment, locking the deadbolt and sliding the security chain into place. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen island, drinking black coffee and watching the sun slowly rise over the city. By the time I arrived at my office at the auditing firm the next morning, my mind was a fortified steel trap. I had traded the terror of the previous night for a cold, calculating focus. I was deep into a corporate tax reconciliation file when the front desk receptionist knocked softly on my glass door. She looked mildly apologetic as she handed me a thick, stiff manila envelope requiring my direct signature. The return address was not from a prestigious downtown firm. It was from a strip mall legal clinic located next to a discount mattress store in Prince George's County. Connor had moved exactly as Tariq predicted. He found a bottom-feeding attorney willing to draft a threatening letter on contingency. I sliced the envelope open with my letter opener and pulled out 3 pages of heavy cardstock. The header was printed in an obnoxiously large, bold font. "Cease and desist and notice of intent to file injunction." I read through the legal jargon, my eyes scanning the paragraphs with the trained speed of an auditor looking for discrepancies. The premise of their argument was almost laughably absurd, but laced with sheer malice. Connor's bargain bin lawyer formally claimed that the $2 quick pick lottery ticket was a conditional family gift. The document asserted that because Roland purchased the ticket using his own personal debit card, he retained equitable interest in the asset. It went on to describe an implicit family syndicate wherein all gifts of financial speculation were mutually understood to be shared among the immediate family members. Then came the actual extortion. The final page laid out the threat with zero subtlety and maximum aggression. If I did not contact their office by Friday at noon to negotiate the immediate transfer of 75% of the winnings into a holding company controlled by Roland and Connor, they would file an emergency court injunction. They explicitly threatened to freeze the lottery payout indefinitely, tying up the funds in probate litigation for years. But the real weapon, the one designed to strike terror into my structured life, was the media threat. The lawyer stated that his clients were fully prepared to take this dispute to the press. They would frame me as a greedy, estranged daughter who stole her elderly father's winning ticket. They wanted to drag my name through the local news, ruin my professional reputation at the accounting firm, and completely destroy the anonymous privacy Tariq had just spent hours securing for me. I did not panic. I simply picked up my desk phone and dialed Tariq's direct line. He answered on the second ring. I read the entire letter to him word for word, keeping my voice completely monotone, avoiding giving them the satisfaction of an emotional reaction even in private. When I finished reading, there was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Tariq let out a sharp, dismissive scoff. A conditional family gift, he repeated the amusement clear in his crisp, professional voice. That is not a real legal precedent, Maya. They are throwing terms at the wall to see what sticks. A gift given without explicit written conditions at the time of transfer is absolute. You do not hand someone a wrapped present on Christmas and retroactively claim equitable interest when you realize the box contains a diamond instead of coal. I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the ridiculous letterhead. I know the legal standing is garbage, Tariq. But the media threat is real. Chloe lives for attention, and Connor is desperate enough to burn my life down just to grab a handful of ashes. If they go to the press, my firm will have a public relations nightmare on their hands. I will lose my job long before the trust payout actually clears the banking hurdles. They want to make me radioactive, so I have no choice but to settle. Exactly, Tariq said, his tone shifting from amused to fiercely tactical. This is a nuisance suit designed to leverage your desire for privacy. If they file that injunction, a judge will eventually throw it out, but the filing itself becomes public record. Your name gets attached to the $300 million ticket. We cannot let them even get to the courthouse. So how do we stop them? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone receiver. How do I crush this before Friday? Tariq leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping into the low strategic register he used when preparing for absolute war in the courtroom. To crush a syndicate claim, we have to prove there is zero foundation for shared financial intent. A syndicate requires a history of pooled resources, joint financial capability, and mutual investment. We need to prove that Roland and Vivian had absolutely no intention or capability of forming a wealth-building enterprise with you. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. They do not have a wealth-building enterprise, Tariq. They have a wealth-draining enterprise, and I am the only one funding it. That is exactly what we are going to weaponize, Tariq said. We need to flip the narrative. We do not just defend your ownership of the ticket. We actively dismantle their illusion of financial superiority. If we can prove that Roland and Vivian are fundamentally insolvent, that they lack the basic financial capacity to even manage a joint investment, we destroy the core pillar of their lawsuit. No judge will believe a bankrupt man formed a multi-million-dollar financial syndicate using a $2 gag gift. I looked at the stack of tax files on my desk, my mind automatically shifting gears. You are saying we need leverage, I stated, the path forward becoming crystal clear. I am saying we need undeniable, devastating leverage, Tariq confirmed. We need to find the skeletons in their financial closet and drag them out into the light. We need to gather enough hard evidence of their financial ruin to make that strip mall lawyer drop the case the second he looks at our counterclaim. We have to show them that if they push this into the public record, they will be the ones who lose everything. I hung up the phone and pushed the cease and desist letter to the edge of my desk. For years, I had used my skills as a senior tax auditor to protect my family from their own reckless spending. I had balanced their books, hidden their shortfalls, and quietly paid their debts to keep their high society facade intact. They thought my skills were just a boring desk job. They were about to find out exactly how lethal a boring desk job could be when the auditor finally stops protecting the client and starts digging for the truth. I locked my office door and pulled the heavy privacy blinds shut. For the next 6 hours, I was not a daughter. I was a senior forensic tax auditor hunting for structural anomalies in a hostile corporate entity. I bypassed my usual client portals and logged directly into the state and county public record databases using my professional credentials. Tariq stayed on a secure video link from his downtown office, quietly pulling commercial litigation dockets, while I focused on the real estate and personal finance trails. We moved in synchronized, highly efficient silence. I started with the crown jewel of their fake empire, the sprawling Prince George's County estate. Roland and Vivian treated that house like a royal palace, hosting their country club friends and throwing lavish catered parties to prove they had arrived. I pulled the deed history and the mortgage records. The screen instantly populated with a cascade of glaring red flags. I felt a cold, sharp shock of validation hit my chest. They were not just struggling. They were entirely fundamentally bankrupt. I traced the primary mortgage timeline. They had refinanced the property 3 separate times in the last 5 years, stripping every single ounce of equity out of the brick and mortar just to fund their lavish lifestyle. But that was not the worst part. I pulled up the county court filings and typed in Roland's legal name. A notice of default had been officially recorded and filed by the primary lender. I stared at the timestamp. They were exactly 90 days away from total public foreclosure. The bank was actively preparing to seize the estate and auction it off on the courthouse steps. I kept digging, pulling their public credit liens and civil judgments. The financial devastation was absolute. They had reached maximum limits on 7 different high-yield credit cards. There were 2 predatory high-interest personal loans taken out just to cover the minimum monthly payments on their exclusive country club membership. The emerald green designer dress Vivian wore to Christmas dinner, the prime rib I was forced to cook, the vintage wine they served to the uncles. It was all financed by toxic, suffocating debt. They were living entirely on credit, building a fragile house of cards over a massive sinkhole. They were terrified of looking poor to their socialite friends while actively drowning in the deep end. This was exactly why Vivian had demanded $15,000 without a second thought. This was why they constantly weaponized family loyalty to guilt me into opening my wallet. They knew the total collapse was imminent. They were trying to extract every possible drop of capital from my checking account to plug holes in a dam that had already violently burst. They did not have the financial capacity to form a legal syndicate to buy a cup of coffee, let alone manage a $300 million lottery ticket. Tariq was absolutely right. No judge on earth would look at this catastrophic financial ruin and believe Roland had orchestrated a multi-million-dollar family investment strategy. I unmuted my microphone, leaning closer to the screen. Tariq, I have the property records, I said, my voice steady and cold. They are in active default. The bank takes the estate in 90 days. They are completely insolvent. Tariq let out a low, sharp whistle over the computer speaker. We have them, he said, the predatory excitement clear in his tone. I will draft the counterclaim immediately and attach the foreclosure notice as Exhibit A. That strip mall lawyer will drop them the second he realizes there are no assets to bill against. But I was not finished. My auditor instincts were fully engaged, and the numbers were telling a story that did not entirely make sense yet. I needed to see the entire financial picture. I pivoted away from their personal assets and pulled the corporate filings for Roland's logistics company. It was a modest business, but it had always generated enough consistent revenue to keep them comfortable before their spending spiraled out of control. The business revenue should have been enough to cover the mortgage. I pulled the public operating agreements, the Uniform Commercial Code filings, and the vendor disbursement records, seeking the missing variable. I started running a trace on the outgoing capital. Something immediately looked deeply wrong. The corporate cash flow was bleeding out through a massive, jagged wound. Over the past 8 months, Roland's company had authorized a series of aggressive, sustained equity withdrawals. The capital was not being reinvested back into the logistics firm. It was not paying operational expenses or employee salaries. It was being funneled outward, systematically disguised as heavy vendor payments to a third-party management consulting firm. I highlighted the outbound routing numbers. The payments were structured in increments just below the threshold that would typically trigger an automatic banking audit. It was a deliberate, calculated drain on the business accounts. I cross-referenced the recipient business entity through the state corporate registry to find the ownership records. The shell company was registered to an anonymous registered agent service in Delaware designed to hide the beneficiaries. But whoever set it up was sloppy. They had filed an amended statement of information in Maryland to conduct local business. I pulled the amended filing and zoomed in on the digital signature block at the bottom of the page. The puzzle pieces violently slammed together, sending a shockwave of absolute fury through my veins. The managing member's signature on the incorporation documents was painfully familiar. It was Connor. My arrogant, condescending white brother-in-law was listed as the sole managing director of the receiving entity. The same man who had mocked my career, who had strutted around the driveway twirling the keys to a $90,000 Range Rover, was the exact parasite draining Roland's business dry. I stared at the signature, my mind racing through the implications. Connor had not just failed at his crypto startups. He was actively looting my father's company. The missing equity, the impending foreclosure, the desperate demands for cash, it all linked directly back to him. He was systematically destroying my parents' financial lives to fund his own fraudulent ventures, and they were completely oblivious. They thought he was a tech genius building an empire while he was actively robbing them blind right under their noses. I had found the ultimate leverage, and I was going to use it to burn his entire world to the ground. I stared at the signature on the screen, my pulse hammering a steady, furious beat against my eardrums. Connor, the golden son-in-law. I immediately logged onto the employer identification number of his Delaware shell company and cross-referenced it with the vendor payout logs from Roland's logistics firm. I needed to see exactly how deep the rot went. I initiated a full forensic reconstruction of the ledger, moving month by month through the corporate disbursements. The methodology was shockingly arrogant. Connor had not even tried to execute a sophisticated laundering scheme. He simply generated fake invoices under his shell company billing Roland for fictitious services like supply chain, blockchain integration, and digital asset optimization. He submitted invoices for $35,000 here, $40,000 there. Over the course of just 8 months, Connor had systematically siphoned exactly $300,000 out of my father's business equity. I sat back in my chair, disgusted by the sheer negligence. Roland, a man who would interrogate me over a $20 increase in a shared phone bill, had rubber-stamped hundreds of thousands of dollars in fake invoices. He was so blindingly eager to brag to his country club friends about his tech genius son-in-law that he handed Connor the keys to his entire financial legacy without a single audit. My parents had placed Connor on an untouchable pedestal, allowing his white privilege and corporate buzzwords to completely bypass their usual intense scrutiny. But where did the money go? Connor did not have a booming lifestyle to show for a $300,000 cash injection. He lived in a rented luxury townhouse and constantly complained about liquid capital. I ran a trace on the outbound routing numbers from Connor's shell entity. The funds did not sit in a traditional banking institution. They were immediately diverted into a centralized cryptocurrency exchange known for high-risk margin trading. I opened another tab and pulled the civil litigation dockets for the tech sector. I found 3 separate breach of contract lawsuits filed against Connor in the last 90 days. It painted a devastatingly clear picture. Last spring, when the cryptocurrency market experienced a massive sudden crash, Connor was heavily overleveraged. He was hit with brutal margin calls. His digital portfolio was entirely liquidated. Desperate to cover his massive losses and keep his fake startup afloat, he turned Roland into his personal ATM. Connor was not a struggling entrepreneur. He was an active embezzler, committing wire fraud to cover his gambling debts in the crypto market. Roland's impending bankruptcy was not a tragic business failure. It was a direct result of Connor bleeding him completely dry. My mind suddenly snapped back to Christmas night. The massive red bow, the cheering family, the brand new 2026 Range Rover sitting in the driveway. A glaring inconsistency flared in my auditor brain. If Roland was 90 days away from foreclosure, and Connor was drowning in catastrophic debt while embezzling funds just to survive, how did anyone secure financing for a luxury vehicle that retailed well over $90,000? I pivoted to the State Department of Motor Vehicles Public Lion database. I typed in Connor and Chloe's names, filtering for recent vehicle registrations in Prince George's County. The system produced a hit immediately. I pulled the vehicle identification number and the associated financing records. I read the lien holder details and let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. It was not financed through the luxury dealership. It was not financed through a traditional Tier 1 banking institution. The lien holder was a notorious predatory subprime auto lender that specialized in high-risk approvals and aggressive repossessions. I scrutinized the lease terms attached to the public filing. It was a financial suicide pact. The contract required zero money down, but carried an exorbitant daily interest rate, Worse, it was structured with a massive balloon payment clause set to trigger in exactly 60 days. The shiny new car was an absolute ticking time bomb. Connor had leased it using predatory financing simply to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth. He needed to keep my parents and his angry investors believing he was flush with cash. Chloe was driving around snapping photos for her social media brand, completely oblivious to the fact that her dream car was going to be violently repossessed before the end of February. The entire picture was now perfectly, devastatingly clear. Connor was a financial predator trapped in a burning building. He had destroyed my parents' livelihood, put his wife in a vehicle that was guaranteed to be repossessed, and was facing serious federal prison time for wire fraud and embezzlement, the absolute second anyone audited Roland's business. This was why he had blocked the elevator doors last night. This was why his eyes were filled with pure, unadulterated panic when he demanded $2 million by Friday. He did not have a tech buyout on the table. He needed my lottery winnings to replace the $300,000 he stole from Roland before the bank seized the logistics company and uncovered the fraudulent invoices. He was trying to use my $300 million ticket to buy his way out of a federal indictment. I reached out and unmuted my microphone. The connection to Tariq's downtown office was still live. "Tariq," I said, my voice vibrating with a lethal, absolute calm. "We do not just have leverage. We have the entire execution order." I heard Tariq shift in his chair. "Talk to me, Maya. What did you find?" I laid it all out. I gave him the exact dates, the fraudulent invoice numbers, the routing paths to the crypto exchange, and the predatory terms of the Range Rover lease. I walked him through the absolute decimation of Roland's business equity at the hands of the golden son-in-law. Tariq was dead silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the heavy, ruthless weight of a prosecutor who just received the murder weapon. "This is not a civil dispute anymore," Maya, Tariq said quietly. "This is grand larceny. Connor is staring down the barrel of 5 to 10 years in federal prison. If we drop this audit file on the table, their strip mall lawyer will not just withdraw the cease and desist. He will sprint out of the room to avoid being named as a co-conspirator." "We hold all the cards," I replied, staring at the digital signature that was about to ruin Connor's life. "We are going to let them think they have the upper hand. We are going to let them walk right into their own trap. Then we are going to drop the audit of a lifetime." The text message from Aunt Denise came through at 6:00 on Wednesday evening, and it was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She invoked the Lord family unity and my supposed duty to my elders, all within 3 sentences. She asked me to meet her at a local 24-hour diner just over the county line for a simple one-on-one conversation. She promised it would just be a cup of coffee to clear the air and pray over the division in our family. I knew absolutely better. I knew my aunt functioned as a high-ranking lieutenant in Vivian and Roland's household cartel. She was the one they deployed to soften the target. But with Tariq finalizing the ironclad trust documents and the devastating audit file of Connor's embezzlement, currently sitting securely in my leather briefcase, I decided to accept the invitation. I wanted to look them in the eye. I wanted to see their arrogance up close one last time before I permanently dismantled it. The heavy smell of fried bacon and stale coffee hit me the moment I pushed through the double glass doors of the diner. The neon lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare over the red vinyl booths. I scanned the room and found exactly what I expected. It was not a private sit-down with my aunt. It was a full-scale, coordinated ambush. They had commandeered the largest corner booth in the back of the restaurant. Roland sat dead center, looking like a discount mafia boss in his tailored sports coat. Vivian was pressed against the window, sipping hot water with a slice of lemon, looking thoroughly disgusted by her surroundings. Chloe and Connor sat on the opposite bench. Aunt Denise stood near the aisle, acting as the sentry and physically blocking the only exit path. I did not turn around. I did not flinch. I walked straight down the aisle and stopped at the edge of their table, looking down at the 5 people who genuinely believed they could bully a senior forensic auditor into handing over a 9-figure fortune. "Sit down," Maya, Roland commanded, using his deep, booming patriarch voice. His tone was not an invitation, it was a directive. I remained standing, clutching my briefcase. "I do not plan on being here long enough to sit down," I replied, my voice completely level. Aunt Denise said this was a one-on-one conversation. I see the entire board of directors decided to show up instead. Roland slammed his heavy fist down on the sticky formica table. The ceramic coffee mugs rattled violently against their saucers, causing a few nearby patrons to turn and stare. "You will drop the attitude right this second." Roland barked, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "We are done playing these childish games with you. You are going to sign that ticket over to my holding company today. You are emotionally unstable, Maya. You have always been prone to dramatics, and you are completely unfit to manage this level of wealth. You are a single woman with no legacy to protect. I am the head of this family, and I will be taking control of the asset before you ruin us all." Vivian immediately chimed in, leaning across the table and pointing a manicured finger at me. "Your father is trying to protect you, Maya. You do not understand how predatory the financial world is. You will be scammed out of every penny." Connor has a background in venture capital. He knows how to shelter liquid assets. "You need to surrender the ticket so the men in this family can secure our future." I looked at Connor. The white brother-in-law who had just spent the last 8 months embezzling $300,000 from the very man sitting across from him was nodding in solemn agreement. Connor adjusted his collar, looking at me with pure condescending arrogance. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way," Maya Connor said, leaning back against the red vinyl. "My lawyer already sent the cease and desist. If you force us to go to court, we will drag your name through the local news. Your accounting firm will fire you the second they realize you are entangled in a massive public legal dispute. Just sign the transfer agreement right now, and we will make sure you are given a generous monthly allowance." The sheer, unadulterated delusion of their demands echoed in the cheap diner. They were threatening me with an allowance from my own lottery winnings. I gripped the handle of my briefcase, feeling the hard edges of the forensic audit file resting inside. I looked directly at Roland. "Emotionally unfit." I repeated the words, tasting like poison on my tongue. "Unfit to manage wealth." "That is incredibly fascinating, Dad, because I distinctly remember a Tuesday afternoon in 2022 when you sat on the cheap sofa in my cramped apartment and begged me, crying real tears, to co-sign a commercial loan for your logistics company." Roland's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off, stepping closer to the table and raising my voice just enough so the waitress wiping down the adjacent booth could hear every single word. "Your credit score was a dismal 580, I stated, locking eyes with him. "The bank laughed you out of their office. You were days away from shuttering your business and losing that massive estate you love to brag about. I was the one who put my name on the line. I was the one who risked my entire financial future to underwrite your failures. I was perfectly fit to be your personal ATM when you were bankrupt. I was perfectly fit to silently pay your property taxes just last month. But suddenly, when I hold a piece of paper worth $300 million, I am emotionally unstable and need a man who commits wage theft to manage my portfolio." Vivian slammed her hand on the table. "Do not you dare speak to your father with that level of disrespect. You will honor your elders in this family. Respect is earned, Mom." I shot back, my gaze shifting to her. "You do not get to demand respect while actively attempting to execute a financial heist against your own daughter in a diner." Chloe scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes behind her designer sunglasses. "You are so incredibly bitter, Maya. This is exactly why you are alone. You cannot handle the fact that Dad trusts Connor more than you. You are just trying to hoard the blessing that was clearly meant to elevate all of us." I looked at my sister, then at Connor, then back to my parents. I had the nuclear codes in my briefcase. I could have dropped the embezzlement evidence right there on the sticky formica table and watched Roland tear Connor apart next to the ketchup dispensers. But doing it in a diner lacked the theatrical devastation they deserved. They needed to believe they had won. They needed to feel the absolute high of victory before I pushed them off the cliff. I let my shoulders slump forward. I relaxed my grip on my briefcase, letting out a long, heavy, exhausted sigh. I broke eye contact, staring down at the scuffed linoleum floor, playing the role of the broken, beaten-down black woman who simply could not fight the overwhelming weight of her family anymore. "I am so tired," I whispered, my voice deliberately cracking. "I am just so tired of fighting all of you." The shift in the booth was instantaneous. The aggressive posture vanished, replaced by predatory glee. Connor sat up straight, his eyes shining with greedy victory. Chloe smiled smugly at Vivian. Roland adjusted his sports coat, leaning back with the proud, satisfied posture of a patriarch who had successfully bullied his rebellious child into submission. "I am not signing anything on a diner napkin," I said, keeping my head slightly bowed. "If you want me to surrender the asset, we are going to do it properly. You want me to hand over control, then you have to treat me with a shred of dignity while I do it." "What exactly are you proposing?" Vivian asked, her tone suddenly magnanimous and accommodating. "Friday night," I said, looking back up at them with defeated eyes. "Have your cheap strip mall lawyer meet me and Tariq on Friday night at Le Diplomat in downtown DC. Book the private dining room. If I am signing my entire life over to you, I want a proper meal and a formal setting to finalize the settlement." Connor let out a short, triumphant laugh. "Le Diplomat it is. I will have the transfer documents printed and ready. We knew you would eventually come to your senses, Maya." Roland nodded, his chest puffed out with absolute arrogant certainty. "I will make the reservation today. Make sure Tariq understands that we will not tolerate any legal stalling. You bring the ticket. We bring the contract. We put this family back together." I looked at the five of them, exchanging victorious, greedy glances. They genuinely thought they had broken me. They believed their manipulation tactics and loud voices had secured them a dynasty. "I will see you on Friday," I said, turning around. I walked down the aisle of the diner, pushing through the glass doors into the cold afternoon air. The second I stepped out of their line of sight, the defeated posture vanished completely. I stood up straight, pulling my wool coat tightly around my shoulders. A slow, cold, lethal smile spread across my face. I had just set the trap at the most exclusive, expensive restaurant in the district. They were going to show up expecting a coronation. I was going to show up to host an execution. Friday night in Washington District of Columbia always carried a specific kind of electric energy, but the atmosphere inside the private dining room at Le Diplomat was thick with a very different kind of charge. The air smelled of expensive truffles, roasted duck, and the sheer unadulterated arrogance of a family convinced they had just executed the heist of the century. I stood outside the heavy mahogany doors for a brief moment beside Tariq, listening to the muffled sounds of clinking crystal and loud, boastful laughter seeping through the wood. They were celebrating. They were actively toasting to my supposed surrender before I even walked into the room. I adjusted the cuffs of my tailored charcoal blazer, feeling the heavy weight of the 3 manila folders resting inside Tariq's leather briefcase. I gave him a single sharp nod. Tariq pushed the double doors open and we walked into the lion's den. The scene playing out around the circular private dining table was a masterpiece of financial delusion. Roland sat at the head of the table wearing a bespoke navy suit that I now knew was purchased on a high-yield credit card, currently in active default. Vivian was seated to his right, draped in silk, and wearing a diamond tennis bracelet she had practically begged me to help her insure 2 years ago. Chloe was busy angling her phone camera to capture the perfect lighting of the $500 bottle of vintage champagne chilling in a silver bucket right next to her plate. Connor, the architect of their impending total ruin, was leaning back in his velvet chair, swirling his champagne glass, with the smug, self-satisfied posture of a Wall Street titan who had just closed a billion-dollar merger. "Ah, there she is!" Connor announced, his voice booming across the intimate room. His tone was laced with a sickening blend of fake warmth and predatory triumph. "We were starting to wonder if you got stuck in traffic, Maya. Come sit down. We ordered the seafood tower to start. We are celebrating family tonight." I did not smile. I did not offer a polite greeting. I walked slowly to the opposite end of the long table and remained standing, resting my hands lightly on the back of the empty dining chair. Tariq stood silently to my right, his posture rigid and commanding, his eyes scanning the four of them with the cold, detached calculation of a seasoned prosecutor. "Let us skip the seafood, Connor," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cutting through the festive atmosphere like a scalpel. "You demanded a meeting to finalize a settlement. Present your terms." Roland cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie, looking slightly annoyed that I was refusing to play along with the celebratory charade. "Now, Maya, there is no need for this hostility. We are all adults here. We had a misunderstanding at the diner, but we are putting that behind us. Connor has spent the last 48 hours working with his legal team to draft an agreement that protects everyone involved. We are ensuring the generational wealth remains secure. Connor set his champagne flute down and picked up a crisp white document portfolio from the empty chair beside him. He slid it across the polished mahogany table. The heavy paper coasted smoothly, stopping just inches from my fingertips. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, interlacing his fingers, and looking up at me with an expression of profound, patronizing generosity. "The terms are incredibly fair," Maya Connor said, adopting a slow, measured cadence, as if he were explaining a simple concept to a slow child. "We recognize that you have been carrying some emotional stress lately. We want to alleviate that burden. The contract stipulates that you will immediately sign over 75% of the lottery winnings to a newly formed limited liability company controlled by Roland and myself. We will manage the investments, handle the tax liabilities, and distribute the dividends according to the family charter. In exchange for your cooperation, we will generously allow you to retain the remaining 25% completely free and clear. You will drop any further claims, and we will legally waive our right to file the injunction. You walk away wealthy, and the family empire is secured. It is a win for everybody." I looked down at the printed contract resting on the table. A 75% surrender. They wanted me to hand over roughly $67 million of untraceable cash to a man facing federal wire fraud charges and a patriarch currently 90 days away from living on the street. They wanted to grant me an allowance from a fortune that legally entirely belonged to me. The absolute blind audacity of the white brother-in-law, sitting at my father's table attempting to legally rob me blind, was almost poetic in its predictability. I did not touch the contract. I did not even look at it for more than 2 seconds. I slowly lifted my gaze and locked eyes with Connor. "I think there is a slight miscalculation in your leverage strategy." "Connor," I stated, my voice dropping into a deadly quiet register. "You brought a strip mall cease and desist letter to an active forensic audit." I raised my right hand and gestured slightly toward Tariq. Tariq stepped forward, unlatching his leather briefcase. He pulled out 3 thick, heavy manila folders and dropped them onto the center of the dining table. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the solid wood echoed sharply in the private room, completely shattering the remaining celebratory tension. Connor blinked, his smug smile faltering slightly. "What is this?" "This is the actual settlement," I replied. I reached forward and picked up the first folder. I flipped it open and slid it directly down the length of the table toward my father. Roland frowned, looking down at the dense stack of legal and financial documents. "That is your personal financial autopsy, Dad," I announced, speaking loudly enough for the private waiter standing outside the glass partition to hear every single syllable. "That is a certified copy of the public notice of default filed against your estate by the primary lender. You are exactly 90 days away from public foreclosure. You have maxed out 7 different credit cards to maintain your country club membership, and you have 0 liquid equity remaining. You are completely, entirely, fundamentally bankrupt." Vivian gasped, dropping her crystal champagne flute. The delicate glass shattered against her dessert plate, spilling expensive liquid across the white linen tablecloth. She grabbed Roland's arm, her eyes wide with absolute horror. "Roland, what is she talking about? Tell me she is lying. Tell me we are not losing the house." Roland's face turned a mottled, dangerous shade of purple. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He stared at the foreclosure notice, the official county seal mocking his entire existence. But I was not finished. The dominoes were lined up perfectly, and I was ready to push the next one. I picked up the second folder, opened it, and slid it directly across the table to my sister. Chloe looked down at the spreadsheets, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. She had never looked at a financial ledger a day in her life. "Chloe," I said, keeping my eyes locked on her confused face, "you have been posting all week about how proud you are of your tech genius husband. I think you should see exactly how he funds his empire." That folder contains the complete forensic audit trail of Connor's shell companies. Over the past 8 months, your husband has generated dozens of fake vendor invoices and submitted them to Dad's logistics company. Connor has systematically embezzled $300,000 out of our father's business equity. Chloe froze, her entire body going rigid. She slowly turned her head to look at Connor. "Connor, what is she talking about?" I kept going, delivering the fatal blow without a single ounce of mercy. He did not invest it into a tech startup, Chloe. He blew every single penny covering margin calls on a catastrophic cryptocurrency collapse. He committed grand larceny and federal wire fraud to pay off his gambling debts. Roland's impending bankruptcy is not a market failure. It is a direct result of your husband bleeding his business completely dry. And that brand new $90,000 Range Rover, sitting in your driveway. Connor leased it, using a predatory subprime lender with a balloon payment you cannot afford. The bank is going to violently repossess that car in exactly 60 days. The implosion was spectacular and instantaneous. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream, shoving her chair backward. She turned on Connor, hitting him hard in the shoulder with her open palm. "You stole from my father. You put me in a fake car. You told me we were rich, you absolute liar." Roland surged out of his chair, the heavy mahogany legs scraping violently against the floor. He pointed a shaking, furious finger at Connor, his chest heaving with rage. "You stole from me. I welcomed you into my home. I gave you my daughter, and you robbed my company blind. I will kill you. I will call the police right now and have you thrown in a federal penitentiary." Connor scrambled backward, his face completely drained of blood, his hands raised defensively in the air. "Roland. Wait, listen to me. It was a bridge loan. I was going to pay it back. Maya is twisting the data. The market crashed. I just needed temporary liquidity. We can use the lottery money to fix all of this. That is why we need her to sign the contract. We can save the house. We can save everything." The sheer desperation in his voice as he tried to pivot, the blame back to my lottery ticket, was pathetic. They were screaming at each other, throwing accusations, hurling insults, their perfect high society facade burning to absolute ash, right there in the middle of a Michelin star restaurant. I picked up a heavy silver spoon from the table setting and tapped it sharply against my crystal water glass. The high, clear, ringing sound pierced through the screaming match. I tapped it again, harder. The shouting slowly died down. Four sets of wide, panicked, furious eyes turned back to me. I picked up the third and final folder. I opened it and held up a single sheet of paper stamped with the official seal of the State Lottery Commission and the Federal Banking Registry. "There is no lottery money for you to fix this with," I stated, my voice carrying the absolute cold finality of an executioner. "This is the finalized, irrevocable blind trust documentation. The $300 million ticket has already been validated, authenticated, and claimed by an anonymous corporate entity. The funds have cleared probate and are currently sitting securely in private offshore accounts that you cannot trace, you cannot access, and you cannot legally touch. Your strip mall cease and desist letter is completely worthless. The money is gone." The silence that slammed into the private dining room was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum pulling all the oxygen out of the space. The realization crashed down upon them like a collapsing building. They had no leverage. They had no legal standing. They had no secret fortune waiting to bail them out of their catastrophic failures. They were bankrupt, facing federal prison, facing public humiliation, and staring directly at the woman they had thrown away, who now held all the power in the world. Vivian broke first. She let out a loud, gut-wrenching sob. She lunged forward, reaching across the table, her manicured hands grasping desperately at the empty air toward my sleeve. "Maya, please," she wailed, her pristine makeup streaking down her face, her pride completely, entirely shattered. "Maya, you cannot do this to us. We are your family. We are your blood. I am your mother. You cannot let them take our home. You cannot let them put Connor in prison. Please, Maya, you have so much money now. You can save us. Please just help us." I looked down at the woman who had spent 32 years telling me I was a disappointment, telling me I was nothing but a wage slave, telling me to take an Uber to the hospital while my appendix ruptured. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt, no obligation. I slowly pulled my arm back out of her reaching grasp. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my personal checkbook. I uncapped my pen, resting it against the crisp paper. "You handed me a $2 piece of paper for Christmas, Vivian," I said, my voice soft but echoing loudly in the quiet room. "You gave it to me in front of 12 people, so you could all laugh at my expense. I am going to be significantly more generous tonight." I wrote out a check, making it payable to cash. I filled in the numeric amount and slashed a bold hard line through the signature box. I ripped the check from the binding and dropped it directly on top of Connor's ridiculous extortion contract. "That is a check for exactly $2,000, I announced. "That should cover the retainer for the cheap lawyer you hired to threaten me, and it should comfortably cover the $500 bottles of champagne you just drank to celebrate a victory you never actually had." I picked up my handbag and pushed my chair back, stepping away from the table. "As for your mountain of predatory debt, your impending foreclosure, and your massive embezzlement scandal," I continued, looking at each of their horrified, broken faces one last time, "I highly recommend you all climb into that brand new luxury SUV and drive yourselves directly to bankruptcy court before the bank repossesses the keys." I turned my back on my family for the final time. I walked toward the heavy mahogany doors, Tariq falling perfectly into step beside me. Behind us, the private dining room erupted into absolute pandemonium. Vivian was screaming hysterically. Roland was shouting violent threats at Connor. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably about her ruined life. I pushed the double doors open and walked out of the restaurant, stepping onto the crowded sidewalk of downtown Washington, D.C. The crisp winter air hit my face, cold and incredibly refreshing. The city lights blurred against the dark sky. A sleek black town car was idling at the curb waiting for us. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I watched the screen light up with a new incoming call from Roland. I did not decline it. I did not block it. I simply opened the settings, toggled the phone to Do Not Disturb, and watched the little crescent moon icon lock into place permanently. I slid into the leather back seat of the waiting car, the heavy door closing behind me, sealing out the noise of the past. The engine purred to life, carrying me forward into a quiet, fierce, absolutely untouchable freedom. The ultimate lesson from these stories is that your worth is never defined by the people who continually choose to misunderstand or mistreat you, even if they share your DNA. Sometimes the most toxic environment you can possibly be in is the exact one you were born into. True empowerment begins the very moment you stop seeking validation from a table where you were never even offered a seat. You have to realize that cutting off toxic family members isn't an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-preservation. When you stop pouring your precious energy into people who only view you as a financial resource or an emotional punching bag, you finally free yourself to build your own empire. Success, unbothered peace, and a fiercely loyal chosen family are your greatest revenge. You don't need to fight for a place in their broken narrative when you have the power to write, direct, and star in your own glorious story. If you have ever had to cut the cord to protect your peace and build your own table, drop A in the comments and let me know how you reclaimed your power.